um, Congratulations to Pope Leo the 14th, um, of formerly a cardinal hailing from the United States of America. Um, it's unusual to have a person who speaks English as their first language, or a variety of English as their first language, as a Catholic Pope. Um, Not actually a Catholic, but um, for people of that particular ilk, that's considered a significant event. So um, you're probably glad he's not a Roman, right? Um, so, in other world news, there's an interesting development going on in relation to the dispute going on between President Oompa Loompa, also known as Donald Trump, and the country of Denmark, as it relates to the attempted annexation of Greenland. For obvious reasons, Denmark's opposed, and so are all the European and NATO countries. That opposition continues unabated. We anticipate, we've heard word from, just walking around the community in Whoop Whoop, and so people have noticed that they've been talking on message boards, and they said that they heard that the leaders in Holland, where the Dutch people live, the people with clogs, which is not too far from Denmark, are greatly opposed to the attempted annexation of Greenland and the blaming of Denmark for anything. So, because there is a strong female leadership in Denmark, they do have male leaders as well who've spoken out quite bluntly and even said directly "fuck you" to Donald Trump. Some might wonder here if it's a generic European Union comment against Trump in relation to that matter, or here a very close neighbouring country such as Holland, where the Dutch live, would qualify as them supporting Denmark, and of course they do. Any attempt to harm Denmark is an attempt to harm Holland. It's a bit like if you threaten to annex New Zealand or Australia, one or two of those countries would get upset. Same with Papua New Guinea or Indonesia, as history clearly shows. When the Emperor of Japan went a bit crazy in the 1940s and attempted to capture the Philippines and Indonesia and bits of Papua New Guinea, the Australians united with the Indonesians and the Papua New Guineans to overthrow the Japanese emperor from those places. Were that to be the case with an attempted annexation of Greenland, Holland, of course, would step in and try to help the Danish recover from that. So the Danish are a free people. We're of the understanding that Denmark does actually have a monarchy, but the monarchy is a symbolic monarchy and does, believe it or not, have an Australian queen at the moment, or more specifically an Australian princess. So this is where it gets really interesting. A commoner of an Australian background actually married an aristocrat of the Danish monarchy and is now the crown princess, consort or whatever of that country. So it's obviously the case that Australia supports Denmark as well. It's because one of their own is part of the leadership of Denmark, as it turns out. So that being said, this is not a pro-monarchist statement. It's more of a statement of acknowledgement that there is a relationship between Denmark and Australia. The relationship is one of leadership, and also and as it relates to different appreciations of sovereignty. Although Australia is not a monarchy, we don't deny the Danish their right to have a monarch should they wish to have one. But we first and foremost acknowledge the Danish parliamentary system, duly elected by the Danish people, and the decisions that they have made to oppose any attempts by the United States of America to besmirch the good names of Danish people, their citizens, or members of the aristocracy that are actually commoners from Australia, as it turns out. To the Danish princess, we say, "G'day, mate," and we hope that that there is peace in your country, and that because you actually have a communist heritage, you're not actually demonized in the same way that other aristocrats typically are, including, in some cases, by Australians. So, whatever the correct term of hello there is hello. Don't actually speak Danish, but we'll pretend to say it anyway. So, on the subject of the Dutch, Holland, they're a confused bunch, okay, because, the ships sail above the cities. Unsurprisingly, that's contributed to, the normalization of marijuana cafes and in Amsterdam and a few interesting art movements. So we'll acknowledge that Holland is an interesting country full of colourful characters, and they're a little bit on the eccentric side, perhaps even schizotypal, and modest by the cultures, and perhaps even what you might call DSM-wise too. Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So anyway, the Dutch are an interesting bunch because they historically thought that they were allies with the United States, because of NATO, perhaps because of the overthrowing of Hitler, or whatever else, perhaps because Denmark used to be allied with the United States. But it would appear that those relationships are completely fractured and the United States is being blamed for everything, and kind of deserves it, in the sense that Donald Trump has taken upon himself to act like he's the center of all things when he's obviously not. So here's a big lesson to American culture, okay? Although individual American civilians and citizens have differing opinions, and sometimes they're actually decent people, if not most of the time, they are a cult-like environment, that country, with the latest MAGA cult being an expression of their cult-like tendencies. One of the cult centers is, in fact, Washington, D.C., and so American commentators note things like geomancy and stuff like that for the purposes of, apparently channeling energy and power and money to the capital there, which isn't working anymore. The American capital is Washington, D.C., is basically become a center of global blame. So Donald Trump's attempt to dress himself up as the vicar of Christ, as it were, or the Pope, was an interesting prelude to the announcement of the first American Pope. So he's actually done that before the Vatican Conclave elected Pope Leo XIV, and that's rather interesting that he did that. As though he was saying he thought he was the Pope. Well, with Donald Trump, he probably did. He is a bit of a crazy man, a crazy dictator-type character. On the other hand, he might have been trying to signal to the Vatican Conclave that he'd like an American Pope because he allegedly has a Catholic background. Some American commentators have already noticed that the recently elected Pope is likely to take a step in the ideological footsteps of Pope Francis. And Pope Francis was for a pope, a left-leaning character. Okay, remember it's for a pope. Okay, popes aren't typically left-leaning people. Okay, they're centrist at best. However, left-leaning does describe Pope Francis. He was concerned about environmental issues and human rights, taking after the tradition of his namesake Francis of Assisi, the humanitarian who loved nature. So apparently Pope Leo XIV is going to take after and walk in the footsteps of his predecessor, which is likely welcomed by a lot of Christians and Catholics around the world who were concerned about this hard right, ultra-nationalist, neo-Nazi and fascistic perhaps not neo-Nazi, but definitely fascistic type of thing that Trumpists were doing, and with their MAGA and whatever else. And so if Donald Trump wants to say that he is like the Pope, that he might want to take into consideration that his policies need to follow suit, and he needs to be less of a disrespectful dickwad. And he needs to issue an apology to Denmark. So we anticipate that one of the first things that Donald Trump would do to honour the election of the American Pope would be to apologise to Denmark and say that Denmark is allowed to identify as they see fit and not be besmirched, have their good name besmirched by the Americans or by Donald Trump in particular, and that Green Island will not be annexed by the United States of America, and that Denmark is full of good people by and large, and that the Danish princess from Australia does have a commoner's background and should not be treated with the disdain for aristocracy that American society is known for, yet hypocritically ignores when you get oligarchy, billionaires, you're running roughshod over the American populace, and that United States of America respects the Danish princess and acknowledges her as an angelic force for good in Denmark that's respected by the Danish and Australian people alike, despite Australian people having no regard for aristocracy and rejecting the English crown. Thank you.